So please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. I would love to hear your thoughts on the topic that I'm discussing today. For some reason, there seems to be tension, disagreement between freight brokers and carriers, especially new freight brokers and carriers, although it's not exclusive just to the new heads. Old heads have these same issues. What these issues usually boil down to is some type of disagreement about the rate, about an accessorial charge like detention, some type of contract dispute. And where I think these issues come from is really not understanding that each of these entities are independent of each other. The freight broker does not work for the carrier, and the carrier does not work for the freight broker. And sometimes I think, especially when we're new, we can have that perception, that idea that one works for the other, and it's just not the case. What you'll notice is there's a contract in place between the freight broker and the carrier. The whole purpose of the contract is to explain the duties, the responsibilities of each, so there is no confusion. But oftentimes, confusion still exists, which is why we have the problems that we have between freight brokers and carriers. So in today's video, I'm going to highlight an issue that freight brokers and carriers often have. I'm going to show you why they're having that issue, who is at fault, and how we can avoid this problem moving forward. So now let's get into the business. So now we're going to identify some of these issues and assign some responsibility. And assigning the responsibility is not saying this person is at fault and they're the bad guy, but it is about identifying the process, saying these are the processes and this is what's happening, this is what's wrong, this is what we need to do to fix it. So we have to assign some responsibility in doing that. So let's get ready to do that. Now, let's take a look at an issue that we have: detention. Detention is an issue, a very common issue in the trucking business, in the freight broker business. What detention is simple. Let's say that a carrier arrived at a facility to deliver a certain product. He's there on time. He has no issues. Everything is good. He checks in. And when he checks in, they tells him, hey, we're not able to give you a door right now. Just wait for a few minutes. We'll be able to get you a door here shortly. Well, a couple hours pass. He still hasn't gotten a door. Then he goes back and say, hey, I haven't gotten a door yet. And then they give him a door. Now he goes to the door and he waits 2 or 3 more hours before he starts to get downloaded. So the carrier has been extended at a facility. Think about detention as saying it's like a carrier being held against his will through no fault of his own. He wasn't late for the appointment. He's on time for the appointment. You know, the shipment is good to go. The shipment hasn't flipped or anything like that. All the pallets are upright. It's time to get loaded, and he hasn't gotten loaded. Now he's there extended hours and could be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours after the time he was supposed to be because there was something going on at the facility, and he has no fault in that. Now, when that happens, something kicks in called detention pay. And detention pay is a compensation to compensate him for the hours that he spends at that facility through no fault of his own. Because remember, when a trucker's wheels are not rolling, he's not making any money. So this money compensates him for his time, so to speak. Okay? So now the detention policy that is in place or should be in place is the broker's detention policy, because the broker has a relationship with the carrier. It is not the carrier that has the relationship with the shipper. The shipper has a relationship with the broker. So the broker and the carrier will have what we call a detention policy. So it outlines what happens when detention takes place. Now, if you don't have a detention policy in place, it's a very real possibility that you don't get paid detention if you're a carrier, if the broker doesn't have that policy in place. So it is your responsibility as the carrier. We're getting ready to assign some responsibility here. It is your responsibility as the carrier to make sure that your broker has a detention policy in place and he pays detention after a certain thing happens. For example, say you were at a facility. You have been there 3 hours. Every hour after the 3rd hour, you may get detention pay. If there's no policy in place that says that, there's a chance that you won't get it. My responsibility is to have a detention policy. Again, we're assigning some responsibility. We gave some responsibility to the carrier. His responsibility is to make sure that there's a policy in place. The broker's responsibility is a negotiator. He has to negotiate with the shipper if the shipper does not have a policy already for detention, to have a policy in place. Because this is important to the broker. This is important to his relationship with the carrier. He has to make sure that he takes care of his carrier by having a detention policy in place, because he knows that sometimes hours are going to be extended at those facilities. And when they are, at least he can compensate his carrier. Because remember, the carrier is your partner. This is your team member. You're working together, so you don't want your team member out in the cold and not getting paid when he should get paid. So as the broker, I'm going to make sure there's a policy in place with the shipper and I that says this is what happens when detention takes place. Yes, the shipper is going to pay it. He'll pay that amount, whatever it is, but it's my job as a freight broker to make sure that that policy is in place. So when I'm talking to the carrier about detention, I already know, he and I already know what the detention policy is, what the detention rate is. Now it's just about saying, hey, let's get a new rate confirmation and give you the detention hours that you've accumulated. Carriers have to get paid detention. If they don't, then that doesn't look very good for the broker. It also doesn't look very good for the carrier, because you are negotiating a very important piece of the contract. All carriers should make sure that there's a detention policy in place if you want to get paid detention. What is the detention policy is the question that we should be asking as a carrier. And as a broker, the question that I should be asking my shipper, what is your detention policy? So I can draw up a contract that reflects my policy based off of what my shipper's policy is to ensure my carrier gets paid. That is making sure we're taking care of carriers. And the carrier has to make sure he takes care of himself by enforcing those policies, making sure that those policies exist, number one. And then when it's time to get paid on that policy. Get those rate confirmations changed out to make sure you get paid, because the contract says already that you're getting paid. So there's nothing to worry about with that part. That's done already. But if it's not done, then you have a problem. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying there is responsibility on both sides for the broker to do his job, to make sure there's a policy already in place that exists between he and the shipper, and then the carrier do his job to say, hey broker, where is the detention policy? I need to know what happens when detention takes place. And one thing to remember is that when a broker is requesting approval from a shipper, he's really requesting that approval for himself. Because in order for the broker to pay a detention, he wants to be able to get paid from the shipper to pay you that detention, which is the right thing to do, because you do have to get an approval for detention. Simply, basically by explaining the situation, this is what took place, carrier arrived on time, and it's past the time limit and he still hasn't gotten unloaded just yet. So we were just, sending this email to make sure that we could get approved for detention. Give them the PO number. Then they'll send you back. PO number has been approved for detention, and you turn that in when you get ready to turn your invoice in to make sure you get paid. But if you have that policy in place, your carrier is already getting paid. You pay that with the invoice. When you get that receipt from the shipper saying that the detention has been approved, now the overall invoice is going to be paid to include detention rate. That's how it works. Okay, so the next issue that we're going to discuss is probably one of the biggest issues between freight brokers and carriers, and that is rates. What is a rate? A rate is simply saying what a broker is paying a shipper to move a load from point A to point B. Then I take that number and I say, okay, I have $1,000 in the load, so I want to go to the carrier at $800 in order for me to make $200 on the load. So the rate is $1,000. The rate that I'm paying to the carrier is $800, and the difference, my profit is $200 on that load. So that's what a rate is. Now, why is there so many problems around rates? Well, carriers are always going to think a lot of times that the freight broker has more in the lane than he's offering. And a lot of times he may have more in the lane. Sometimes he may not have more. But from my experience, most times Carriers think that freight brokers have way more in the lane than they actually have. And that's, causes some problems there because the carrier is saying, hey, I think you have a little bit more, so I want a little bit more from the pie, which is understandable. But in most cases, at least in my experience, those rates are not nearly as high as you're thinking in most cases. Now, yes, there are going to be times when rates go up and we have some leverage and we can make some things happen in those lanes and get better rates. But for my experience, again, usually those rates are probably $200 to $500 a cushion in those rates. And a lot of times closer to the 200 mark, depending on how good the freight broker is at bidding lanes, at pricing, at negotiating, because that's what this thing is all about when it boils down to it. The freight broker is going to the shipper and he's offering a rate based off of his experience. Now, if you have a rookie freight broker, then sometimes you're going to have some very, very low rates in those lanes because they may not be using leverage. They may not have that leverage just yet. They may not have that experience of bidding lanes, and they bid too low trying to get the lane, and then they bring a weak rate to the market, and now you have a carrier that probably is not going to take that rate. So that's what rates are. That's why we have so many problems around rates, because there always seems to be a little bit more to the carrier in the rate, and then that negotiation goes on. But once we negotiate and we come up with a price that you and I can agree on, the broker and the carrier, we've said, hey, this rate will work. And I send you out a rate confirmation, and that rate confirmation is signed, you remove the load, that one is done. It's finished. What usually happens is other people say that a carrier shouldn't move a load based on this rate or that rate. But you are not that carrier. You're not in that situation. So it probably, you probably wouldn't be the best person to try and give advice to what the carrier should do, because the carrier knows what he should do. It's his own situation. So, when it comes down to bidding on lanes and rates, that's something that, you're going to get better at as time goes. But also, the carrier has a responsibility here too, to get the rate that is good for him and his truck. Because if he is not profitable, then he can't stay in business either. So the carrier has some responsibility, and the broker has responsibility when it comes to rates. We cannot assign the responsibility to one person. And I think that what happens a lot of times. People say, oh, the broker is the problem with rates. Or somebody say the carrier is the problem. No, they both are the problem. The broker has to understand that the carrier is a team member. The carrier has to understand that also and treat each other like team members. So when I go out and start to negotiate on a rate, I'm negotiating for the best rate because I know that I have to get a piece of that pie, and my carrier has to get the lion's share, and it has to be sufficient. It has to be enough money so that he can keep his truck moving and, of course, have some money to put in pocket, because this is a profit game. This is not just about making money. That is what confuses a lot of people a lot of time. You get the idea you're making money because money is coming in. What are you truly making when you move a load from point A to point B? How much gas are you spending? What is your time worth? So when you're coming up with rates, you have to get a rate that is good for you, that is good for your business. And when you do that and you agree to that, then we send you out a rate con, we sign that rate con, and we move the load. And that's it. But at the end of the day, nobody is twisting each other's arm to take a rate. That is totally and completely up to the carrier, whether he's going to take a rate or he's not going to take a rate. And also the broker, it's going to be up to him to make sure that he's coming to his carrier with a solid rate, because people aren't working for pennies. And why this is so important is because I don't own trucks. So if I don't treat the people that own trucks in a way that's respectful, that they can say, you know what, I can see the value in Brandon and Alliance Logistics. If truckers cannot see that, then they won't be working with me for long. Okay, so the last thing that I want to leave you with is that there's plenty of blame to go around. We can always look to blame someone else for problems that we're having in our own business. At the end of the day, if your business is not doing well, it's the business owner's faults. What we understand is that as entrepreneurs, it's not about looking for someone else to blame something on, because it's my fault. If my business is not going the way that I want it to go, if it's not making the profits that I want it to make, if it's not making the impact that I want it to make, then it's my own fault and I have to do something about it in order to change the outcome. If I don't do anything about it, if I look for someone else to blame, then it's very likely the problem is never going to get fixed because I'm not addressing the root cause of the problem, and the root cause is me. If my business is going wrong, so I have to fix those problems. That's the same with the truck driver. That's the same with any other freight broker. If a problem exists, then it's the business owner's fault. He must get down to the bottom of it in order to fix it. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I certainly hope this information has been helpful. If you're interested in learning more about the freight broker business, I'm going to leave a link in the description. It's my 5-video series titled How the Load Movement Process Works. It'll give you an in-depth look at the freight broker business through my eyes. You'll get to see me in my office moving freight, talking to carriers, talking to shippers. So check the description for the link. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today. I wish you the very best in your life and business. See you at the top, because the bottom is much too crowded.